Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I want to thank first the companies that presented earlier today. We had some people travel from Texas and New York and a lot of different places, and we appreciate everybody who made it. We're really excited to host today. Again, my name is Larry Kane. I'm a partner at the law firm for Carrington, Sutcliffe in San Francisco. I've been working with entrepreneurs for over 20 years. My practice today is principally with ed companies, universities, high schools, and EdTec companies. What I want to do is, before we introduce Milton and get the panel going, I want to thank our co-sponsors, EdSurge, Betsy Corcoran, and she's going to say a couple things about EdSurge and the SF School Alliance, and where's Terry? And Terry Ferguson. So go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for coming out, especially on a rainy day. I want to thank Warwick. He's done a fantastic job. Larry's done a great job. One of the things we're trying to do today, I think, is really bridge this communication between the entrepreneurial community and the educator community. It's the one thing we hear over and over. At EdSurge, we write newsletters about education, technology, entrepreneurship. But what we really are trying to do is sort of bridge these communities, help people understand what the needs of the educators are, what some of the demands are on the entrepreneurs, all with the idea of improving the kinds of tools and support that we have for learning. So thank you all very much. Please talk to us. I'm here. My colleague Chris Hattori is in the back. Come up and bug us after this fantastic panel and tell us how we can continue to improve this dialogue and keep it going. Thanks.
I'm Terry Ferguson, and I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco School Alliance. So as Betsy was saying about the dialogue, we're kind of the organization. On the educator side, we are a strategic partner with the San Francisco Unified School District. So we are involved with them as they build their strategic new direction. We have a wonderful new superintendent and a wonderful team at the top of the district that have a deep interest in learning and being able to get into this sphere of using educational technology for the purposes of learning. They face a lot of challenges. They have many people that want to partner with them, so we're kind of like the sort of strategic partner that helps to connect folks, and we also will be here through the evening. We're very excited, and I want to thank you, Larry, for all the work that you've done and Joyce has done to help set this up, and both Milton and Larry are on our boards, and so we're here to help facilitate the direction that all of you want to go. Thank you.
You want to introduce some of the...
Yep, yes, Barbara Blisco. Barbara, if you could just stand for a sec. Barbara is our Chief Operations Officer at the Alliance, and we've also had Jim Ryan here today, who is the project manager for a grant that we have with Bechtel on the Common Core Mathematics, and Lori Horowitz on the education side. Lori is working with English Language Arts, real experts, and both have private sector experience as well as education experience, so they're helping us make these connections. And then an incredible group of people here from the district.
Yeah.
If the district, first of all, Guadalupe Guerrero, who is the Deputy Superintendent for the San Francisco Unified School District, and he has the charge of all the education parts of that world. And then Leslie Garner is his Executive Director. Could you just raise your hand, Leslie? Leslie just came from Teach for America, and she is working to help with this strategic direction. Laura Moran, could you just stand up for just a second? Laura comes via Stepsky, and before that at Schwab for private sector, and then was in Oakland while they were doing the state takeover in Oakland. She helped get them take the takeover off and get things back in order. She is now the Chief of Staff and Chief Strategist with Richard Carranza, who is our superintendent. And then Luis Valentino is here, and Luis is the new Chief Academic Officer, so he is rebuilding and rethinking the curriculum department and the strategies to guide the educational efforts. Bill Sanderson is here. Bill is the Executive Director for Luis in the education side. You're going to meet in a second Matt Kinzie, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the district and is really all of the technology and information infrastructure is there. And I think there are a couple of other people that I missed because I came in late myself. But, who? Michelle, oh yes, Michelle, would you stand? Michelle, I just met Michelle. She is now the Knowledge Management Program Supervisor. So she will be in the education side with Luis and Bill in the curriculum shop. Has a great career and background up in Napa at the county level, doing a lot with education technology. So she's going to be a terrific, she just started yesterday, like 2 days ago. So welcome to SFUSD and welcome to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you, Terry. Again, I want to thank every member of the SFUSD who came to our event today, and Matt for sticking with us for another hour and a half or so, maybe 3 hours. I promise there'll be plenty of beer at the end. I want to introduce our esteemed moderator, Milton Chen. Milton has been involved with education technology before, probably thought of that, back in the days at Sesame Street.
Back when it was called television.
Back when it was called television. I know Milton through his work at the San Francisco School Alliance. I know you played basketball with Arnie Duncan. I never heard who won that game.
Much better than I am.
Eric is here too.
Oh, Eric McDonald, who's the president of the board and from United Way, the SS School Alliance. Milton currently is a senior fellow for the George Lucas Foundation. He was executive director for Edutopia, and his recent book, Education Nation, 6 Leading Edges of Innovation in Our Schools. And Milton, please take it.
Thanks, Larry. Well, welcome everyone, and I hope feel you're in for an exciting evening. We're going to go till a little bit, probably after 7. But as Larry said, we promise you all the beer you can drink. It's a pleasure to moderate this, and we're going to try to make it interactive in the spirit of the pitch sessions that just concluded for entrepreneurs to present their ideas to VCs and to educators. We're trying to make this interactive, so they won't be speaking very long. We're going to open it up pretty quickly to your questions and comments. You see we have 5 panelists today, and they represent a range of expertise from the school districts to investors to developers. They're each going to talk for about 5 minutes, and that's it. And then after the first 2 representing the schools community, we're going to open it up to your questions, and we'll go on to the remaining 3 speakers. And then, as I say, hopefully devote more of this time to more interaction, more comments, and having described the work they're doing iteratively through your questions and their answers. I'll just say one opening comment, and that is that this is a great time for education. Finally, we have the tools to help all students learn at higher levels and hopefully learn more quickly. I've often remarked that, in education, we hold time constant, but we let learning vary a lot. We give kids 180 days, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Those who perform at higher levels take advantage of a lot of other learning time. We want to make that additional learning time available to all students now. We've got some great tools to do this. My career goes back to Sesame Street, where we learned early on. The preschoolers can learn a lot more earlier and faster than we thought was possible because we didn't have the right tools. So you're going to hear today about a number of exciting tools that are being developed. Technology's gotten to the point where it's much more affordable. As Larry mentioned, some of us have been in this game for 2 or 3 decades, waiting for this moment to arrive. Even with the school budgets, even with declining revenue, it's this perfect storm that we're facing. Declining budgets, new tools, declining cost of technology. Can we turn this perfect storm into, using a California metaphor, a perfect wave? Can we create a new educational system, certainly here in San Francisco and in California? That's what I care about, but hopefully nationally and internationally. And when you think about it, education is a very information-intensive endeavor. From what goes on between the student and the teacher, to the classroom environment, and what students are doing together within the classroom, the entire school, the importance of parents knowing how their kids are doing, the importance of teachers tracking the performance of every one of their students in very specific ways, all the way up to new forms of assessment. How do we track accountability as a state, as a nation? This is a lot of information we need to harness, and we haven't had the tools. Finally, we're getting to the point where we can use technology, which is all about information, to manage this information, to present it in clear ways, and help us make better decisions, from students and teachers all the way up to governors. So let me conclude that with, that's my main remark this evening. It's an important time, and we take advantage of it, and technology plays a very important role. Let me turn to Matt Kinzie, who's the CTO for the San Francisco Unified School District, and they will each introduce you to themselves as part of their remarks, and they'll also answer a framing question, which for Matt is, tell us about the technology plans and vision for the district.
Thank you, Milton. Just to reiterate, I am Matt Kinzie. I am Chief Technology Officer at San Francisco Unified School District. So from the framing question, I want to give 5 minutes. I'm really going to focus on school district more than myself. So the framing question, what do we care about? What is important to us? There are really 3 main goals that drive what we do. So the first goal is access and equity. We live in a city, we work in a city that has children from many different cultural backgrounds, many different ethnic backgrounds, and there's a wide range of achievement. We have some of the highest achieving students in the country, we have some of the lowest achieving students in the country. And to us, it's unacceptable. It's very important that every student achieves at a high level. And we have a term that we use in access and equity, that is to break the predictive power of demographics. You should not be able to look at the demographic of a student and have any kind of reliability in predicting how the student's going to do in education. We think that's unacceptable. So we're looking at our structures and our systems and our data and how we do instruction to change that and make sure that every student has access and equity in distribution of instruction, and so they can perform at a very high level. Which leads to our next goal, which is student achievement. We do believe every student can achieve at a high level. That also includes special education students, English language learners, a variety of other students. So we believe we can do that. We do it through differentiated instruction. We can make it happen. And we're doing a lot of work in trying to get that to happen. And the third goal is accountability. We need to be open and transparent to the community about what we're doing, how we're achieving. And from a technology perspective, that's kind of important because education data can be difficult to understand and interpret. So how do we communicate what we're doing, how we're doing at a very clear and easy digestible level to the community? So I'm really excited to be here tonight because this group is about innovation. This group is about changing the way we do things and doing things in a different way. And our superintendent has a saying that he likes to say over and over and over again, which is break the elasticity of the status quo. So for those in economics majors understand the elastic curve, the idea is that the status quo has a way of somehow or another staying in how we do things, and we need to change that, we need to break that. So we're really looking at this group to come up with ideas, how can we do things differently? How can we be innovative in education? And how can we really achieve our goals? From a technology person, lots of great ideas out there, lots of things going on, but at the end of the day, we also have to support our teachers, we have to support our students. And we kind of have a paradox going on in the school district right now where we don't have enough technology. You ask anybody in the school district, and they'll probably tell you, we don't have enough technology. You ask the same people, and probably 95% will tell you they can't handle the amount of technology they have now. And so it's kind of a strange paradox, but that's because of cloud-based services, because there's so many things going on, it's such a disjointed effort in terms of how we're looking at technology. So we're talking about putting instruction in place to really align technology to our instructional strategies and how we intend to educate students. So some of the things we're looking at, those are some of the things that are important to us, and I'm just trying to figure out the wrong projects. So. Yeah. Well done. Oh, sorry.
So Adam Miller's next, and he's the Senior Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at EdTec, which is a charter school management services organization. You can say some more about that. And our framing question for Adam is really, what are the technology needs of charter schools in 2013 and beyond?
Thank you. Yeah, Adam Miller. I'm with EdTec, and that's EDTEC, no H at the end. But we were lucky enough to get the domain name before the EdTec growth last few years. So thank you all for your interest in driving traffic accidentally to our website. But we work with charter schools, and I've been in the charter school space for several years before EdTec. That's with the California Charter Schools Association as a chief operating officer there. For those of you who are just getting to know the education space, there are over 1,000 charter schools in California, and that equates to about 400,000 students. So it's a large market, but also a very hard market to reach is the main thing. At EdTec, we're a back office provider. We try to use our scale to be subscale organizations, standalone charter schools, individual schools that are nonprofits run by individual operators instead of a district. And we do this in a couple ways. One is that we have a lot of success, and our real bread and butter is providing back office financial services. So, as mentioned, that is of course AP or payroll, and providing expertise to charter schools. An MBA level person that can go in and work with a charter school that individual school can't afford on their own. And we've maybe more interest is we've done that in the technology space as well. So using our size to bring access to charter schools for certain technology. What we can do is aggregate this demand and then work with a technology provider, a software provider, and cut that master deal and bring that pricing available to charter schools that they may not be able to get on their own. Or even, since charter schools, many of them are quite small, 200 students, 300 students, 500 students, for a lot of technology providers, it's not necessarily the most interesting market to go after, picking off one at a time. So we're able to bring that sort of technology to charter schools and also able to support them and provide the first level support as well with charter schools and their individual needs and customizations for their unique educational models. Talking about what charter schools are looking for in the technology space is difficult, in that each charter school, charter school operators are really entrepreneurs, and just like you. And so I think when you talk with charter school, you'll find a kindred spirit in that they found that there's something missing in the marketplace, and there's a need out there, and they have a vision to work with a specific group of students and meet this need and enhance their performance or create a new educational model. So there's 1,000 charter schools and 1,000 different ways of doing things. But if I could group it into 3 categories, the first is really data and transforming data into information. And this is a couple areas: student performance, student assessment, as well as teacher effectiveness. Charter schools are trying something new. They're trying to, they're reformers and trying to change the way of doing things, so they need real-time information if what they're doing is actually working. And both just for their mission, but also student performance is really the coin of the realm, I guess, if you will. And charter schools need to show to both their authorizer, they're approved by a district usually, that what they're doing is improving student outcomes, and so they need hard data to prove that. And also as well, they're in a situation where parents are choosing to send their students to the school, and so they have to show their potential customers, the parents and the students, that there's a real there, and that the school's making a difference. So data and information. Another one is unifying all the different systems at the school. Charter schools are small businesses as well as schools. And so there's the operational end of things and the educational end of things. And all the different systems, maybe it's the accounting platform, the student information system, the student assessment system, trying to get that data to communicate to each other. And I know there's some startups doing some great work to get that going, like Clever. But it continues to be a real challenge for charter schools to be able to do this and really get all that information together to see if they are properly putting their resources towards the best educational outcomes. And really the third space is what everyone's talking about these days, is blended learning and flipped classroom. And so our charter schools are coming to us, how do we do this? How do we get in this space? What should we be using? And so anything in that model any sort of technology that's going to help them do that, help them understand they're doing it effectively, and it's going to be delivering their education model more efficiently and more effectively is going to be very meaningful to charter schools.
Great. So in the interest of interactivity, it's your turn. We'll take a pause here and invite your questions and comments for Matt representing the district here and also Adam representing charter schools. So I don't know if we have microphones, but please stand up and also say who you are. And
Here we have
I can shout. That's okay.
Great.
I'm going to run around. My name is Paul Smith. I'm with a small startup here in San Francisco called LearnSprout. And we built the first universal API for education that connects to a student information system. One of the things that we're dealing with right now, and one of the big problems that we face, is the growth of the EdTech startup that is not direct to consumer, okay, or direct to teacher. We've seen success with companies like, Edmodo. They've seen rapid growth with their direct to teacher model. But what we're wondering is, what do we have to do to break down the barriers to entry for the slow growth model? And there's a lot of resistance in the VC world to the slow growth EdTech startup. A product that might take a year-long sales cycle. I'm thinking about student information systems, particularly in the charter school space, where you're installing a lot of these business systems that run the day-to-day operations of school districts. We haven't seen new technology come into the space, and the leading student information systems are 15 and 16 years old. So what do we have to do to break down that barrier to allow enterprise-level ed tech to come into the fold?
So I think I'm part of your problem. Yeah, how do you reach someone like me? I mean, I get, 30 to 50 vendor calls a day, and quite frankly, I ignore back practically every single one. If I don't already have a relationship with you, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a relationship with me. I'm being candid here. But we are, particularly in the administrative space and those types of things, you're right, SAS is a very sort of stagnant technology, hasn't really changed dramatically. I do see some of the textbook publishers coming out with some very interesting SAS models that really tie the student data into intervention strategies. That really so ties back into the classroom, but they haven't really been able to figure out how to go through the RFP process and those types of things. So anytime we're talking about committing large dollars, it takes a long time to do that. I'm just struggling with that. I think, one is there's many ranges of school district sizes. With San Francisco Unified, you might, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but you might have a bit more of a challenge trying to get into San Francisco Unified, say, than a school district that's in the 4,000 to 10,000 student range. You'll find that often they're easier to work with. You can work faster through them. They don't have, as many departments that kind of gatekeepers that want to check and verify things and those types of things. So if you can build a good base there, and then from that leap into the larger schools, I think you have a better chance of doing that. And I think that's a typical private sector venture capital model as well.
Yeah, and that was really going to say related to charter schools as well. I think for those of you who are starting businesses, charter schools are great partners in the beta phase. You're going to be able to get in very quickly. There's one decision maker there. They want to push the envelope. Also the entrepreneurs, as I mentioned. So there's some kind of kindred spirit there. And so they're going to be able to partner with you and work with you as you try and figure things out. And also you're going to be able to kind of work with them with that proof of concept. You can work with some charter schools in a short time frame to get it in there and get that proof of concept that may get you into the door of a district, that you've done this at a few schools and this is what it looks like. So charter schools are a nice market they're the early phases. A lot of later phases, when you have a project, it's nicer to get a real set product, it's nicer to land SFUSD rather than picking off one charter school at a time. But at the early stages, I really encourage you to explore the charter school space.
Comments, questions?
Hi, question for Matt. If the teachers are the bottleneck to technology, as you've mentioned that there's too much they can't handle the technology that you already have, how do you see the pathway for things like Xbox and PlayStation, where every parent in this room knows their kids know how to work that technology better than they can? And so all of a sudden you've got kids that you don't even have to call it using technology. They're just doing. So what are the barriers to getting there, and how do you push that? How do you see that happening if that's really the case, that the teacher really is the bottleneck?
Don't recall saying teachers are the bottleneck. In fact, the previous gentleman was saying that actually to the teacher market is actually, I forgot the word he used, but marketing to the teachers is actually easier to do than if you try to market to a large district level. And I do believe there's a case for that. He mentioned Edmodo. So as an example, we don't really actually have an agreement with Edmodo, but we know that there's 92 teachers on Edmodo, 1,700 students on Edmodo, covering about 49 schools, and we don't actually officially have a relationship with them. Right? But the teachers are using the technology, and Edmodo is a wonderful technology. I've used it in my adult professional development. So stuff like Xbox and those types of things, we actually do have some pilots in individual classrooms where they are looking at Xbox type technologies, in particular Kinect. So actually I just heard a really interesting demo from one of the vendors today that basically took that Kinect technology and put it in a very cheap, simple platform like an iPad with single camera, and it looked like it worked really well. So, but we do have some pilots going on in the school, actually a fair number of pilots going on in the school, and Microsoft's working with us to do that. I don't know about the other game systems, but that may be out there. The school district's so big, there's a lot of things going on that I'm not always aware of. So we do have that, and often selling to teachers is actually a lot of times easier than trying to sell to a large-scale market. Now, if we want to try to scale something like that up, that's when it becomes a challenge. And what's really going to be important is how does that align to our instructional strategy and to our curriculum strategy and all our curriculum materials, and how does all that work? That's when we have a lot more work to do to make sure that's really what we want to do. We want to work, but that is a model we're trying to build as well. We're trying to take best practices from schools, scale them, and share them.
Hi, Matt, I have a question for you in regards to how does the school district involve the parent community? What were the questions? Yes. Sorry, I'll stand up too. I'm Catherine Nicholson. I'm actually CEO and co-founder of Mama Zoo, and we actually build a mobile web app to involve parent communities around the school districts, because I'm also a parent of 2 elementary school kids, and I know that my involvement is integral, not only to pass measures for funding for the school, but also to help the teachers in managing the classrooms. And so I just would like to see, can you comment on how do you involve that parent community to align it with the school district?
I really want to hand this over to Guadalupe, but I'll try to do the best I can. Because Guadalupe has been doing a lot of work in that, because parent and community involvement is absolutely critical in turning around schools. In fact, the model that we're using in school turnaround, one of the key components is parent and community involvement. So we've actually established at least one major group where we're really looking at parental involvement and trying to bring them in. We're assigning liaisons to almost every school, definitely schools in our underserved areas. Keep looking at Guadalupe. If I say something wrong, don't. So for assigning liaisons in the schools to really work with the community and bring them in. From a technology perspective, we're actually looking at putting in kiosks in the school where parents can come in and they can get access to School Loop. So you mentioned elementary school. You're not going to see School Loop in elementary school yet, but that's something we want to move out. So School Loop is, one way to look at it is a parent portal, but we actually don't necessarily look at it as just a parent portal. One of the key things this year that we're looking at the district is this relationship between the teacher, the student, and content. And so School Loop is kind of a technology platform that does that. So it is a parent portal, but it also gives parents access to assignments, to student attendance. We don't really have too much discipline data in there, but there may come someday. It's a communication mechanism, a secure communication mechanism between the parent, the teacher, and the parent and student. Within School Loop, so something that you really address what I'm going to bring in is that we have relationships with about 300 or so community-based organizations that provide after-school tutoring and other types of engagement models for students to try to get them to stay engaged in education, try to stay off some of the stuff on the streets. So School Loop, we're actually piloting with 5 community-based organizations right now, where we're seeing, can we bring them into that loop? Where they can actually see what's going on during the day and then try to adjust their after-school activities for that, and then provide that feedback information back to the teacher and to the parents so they can understand that. So those are some of the models we're doing. Is there any big thing I'm missing, Rose? Okay.
Is there another comment? Okay.
Hello, so my name is Arjun Khalsa. I'm the CEO of Conceptual Math. We're a Bay Area-based company that's pursuing an area that I want to address a question to that may be pertinent for anybody on the panel. And it has to do with leveraging technology for curricular delivery. So I think over the years, we've seen software programs, we've seen data delivery and analysis systems, we've seen sort of backbone products where data provides like a student information system for a district. And yet I think we all also recognize that there are certain aspects of the curriculum, and certainly math would be one of them, where generally our nation is failing. There's real disconnect between what we perceive as the potential for student achievement and teacher achievement and the result that we're getting. And I'm wondering, from a perspective of school leadership, financial perspective, entrepreneurial perspective, what you folks view as the potential for technology and innovation in the technological domain to affect the delivery of the core of the curricular experience.
Who wants that?
Yes?
Yes.
You wanted to
So, hi, my name is Jan Zawadzki. I'm the CEO of Hapara. We build solutions for cloud platforms like Google. I mean, look, the short of it is the world is changing. Right? There's a very good chance, looking at this room, that unless you've been teaching in the classroom in the last 5 years, what you recall as your school experience is not what your kids will see. In fact, it's vastly different. The world is changing in many ways. There are over 100 countries right now that are putting broadband to every school. I'm not sure how many avid surfers there are here, but if you're in Costa Rica, there's a very good chance you'll find surfing in little villages that you get to on a little unpaved road that have high-speed broadband because it goes to the local school. Thailand is buying hundreds of thousands of Android tablets for every student in the country. So I think the question of how is curriculum delivery changing, I think that's to be seen. That's what we're trying to figure out. That's where you come in.
Great. Let's get to curriculum. And let me turn to our developers and our investors. Gloria Lee is the COO at NewSchools Venture Fund, also based here in San Francisco, with offices Oakland, sorry, and LA as well. Anyway, so Gloria, you'll introduce yourself and the work of NewSchools, but also tell us how you're thinking about investments in educational technology and maybe some successes that you've seen.
So before I get started, I actually wanted to see if you could raise your hand if you're an EdTech entrepreneur, folks. If you could raise your hand, if you are an educator, and if you could raise your hand if you are an investor. It's a pretty good mix. Not enough money in the room, but other than that, pretty good mix.
We feel that.
Yes. So in addition to wearing my investor hat as CEO of NewSchools Venture Fund, previous to that, I was one of the co-founders of Aspire Public Schools, which is a charter management organization in the Bay Area. I was COO for many years, and then also was a Bay Area superintendent. So got a chance to actually have the experience not only of the kinds of challenges that Matt faces in his position, not nearly at the scale that you face it, but also kind of really understanding what teachers and principals need to try to run schools effectively and increase student achievement. So I kind of bring a lot of different, and I'm also a parent, and I'm also a founder of the individual standalone charter school. So I bring a lot of different perspectives to this challenge of education technology. And I should also say that even though the charter people on this panel outnumber the district person, the reality out there in the world is completely different, right? The vast majority of students in public schools in the United States are in regular district schools, not in charter schools. So I think you all know that, but I just want to make that clear that we're misrepresented on the panel. And the other thing I also want to say to you, Matt, is that I do not believe that charters are the evil empire. It's not anti-district. I have a huge amount of respect for the work that you all do, you and your colleagues. So NewSchools Venture Fund is a venture philanthropy, or sometimes we're considered kind of a double, an impact investor. But we're not a double bottom line fund. For those of you who were at our seed fund event a couple of weeks ago, I apologize for using my analogy, but so I'm reading Harry Potter with my son, and in Harry Potter there's all of these mythical creatures that are centaurs, half man, half horse, or half lion, half eagle. Where we are half venture capital, half philanthropy. So we are a mythical creature, but we actually do exist in Oakland. You can find us. And we actually are looking for the intersection of products and tools and organizations in education technology that actually have genuine educational value, that are really going to improve student learning, and that are scalable. So there's that little intersection. We're pretty much focused on investing in education entrepreneurs. We've always done that, not just in education technology, but in other aspects of education. And we're really excited by what we're seeing right now in the field. There's a lot of amazing ideas, a lot of amazing entrepreneurs, including a couple to my right here, that are doing incredibly groundbreaking things that we think are going to change the lives of kids and teachers and administrators. I do want to address one of the points which the gentleman up here and the woman up here raised earlier about the role of parents in education. And I think that those of you who are education entrepreneurs in this room know that one of the big questions and challenges for you is, are you going to go enterprise or are you going to go direct to consumer? It's a really important question from our perspective as NewSchools Venture Fund in terms of impact. So it's ironic or appropriate that the name of this conference is Total Access, because that's what we're about. What we want, our mission as an organization, as a not-for-profit organization, is to ensure that all students have access to a better education, including kids that, live in the wrong zip code, right? And so when we think about this question of enterprise or direct-to-consumer, the challenge with direct-to-consumer from a mission perspective, not from a financial or scalability or economic perspective, from a mission perspective, is that it potentially exacerbates the achievement gap. What it means is that all of you parents that are in the room, which I'm assuming there's many of you, have the resources and the education and the wherewithal to make sure that your child has the very best learning apps on your smartphone or on your computer or on your tablet. And you are making sure if your child is not getting that at school, he or she is getting that at home. And that's not the case for many, many families, particularly in urban places like San Francisco. And so the role of EdTech companies that are willing to slug through and go direct to the districts so that these students can get the best tools available is something that we really like to see. It's painful, I know, and it does make getting funding hard. But in terms of our social mission, that's one of the most important things.
Thanks, Gloria. Yeah, so Rob Mancabelli, the CEO of BrightBytes, will tell you all about it and also talk about how you're approaching the market with an unusual distribution channel to the earlier question.
Thank you very much, Milton. I appreciate that. So I'm the CEO of BrightBytes, but in what seems like a former life, I was a chief technology officer in public schools. And I became very familiar with the problems that schools were facing in educational technology, starting literally from the moment that somebody said, I guess we're going to have to install the internet. It's this new thing that's come out. And I think it could be really big. I was there at that moment, actually. I was there at the moment where I went to a conference, true story, 1996, and one school at the conference said, we will never install the internet. We think it could be a huge distraction for us. We'll never do it. What happened was I became so familiar with the problems, I became obsessed with them. Ended up writing a book and becoming a speaker and speaking in a lot of places around the country and around the world on the problems that we're facing in educational technology, much like Arjun referred to. And decided after doing that for a while that I was living in focus groups. I was giving a speech to 200 superintendents, and they would come up at the end and say, these are all my problems, why doesn't somebody solve them? So now I'm trying to solve them. So I'm the CEO of a company that's actually trying to solve one of the many, many challenges that are in schools. So when you said we need to get the entrepreneurs and the school people in the same room together, that would be me. I'm that person. So Milton referred to, and Larry asked me to speak a little bit about our approach at BrightBytes to the sales channel and sales cycle challenges in school, which I'm sure for the entrepreneurs in the room and many others are among the foremost things in your mind. A lot of people look at schools and selling as sort of the Bermuda Triangle. You go in and you don't really know if you're going to come out. You don't know how long it's going to be until you come out. And and that there's no map. There's no way to sort of know. You either get lucky or you don't get lucky, and some come out and some don't. And at BrightBytes, we really think that actually it's more like a treasure hunt. And for us, the treasure is about a person within the school hierarchy having a need and an entrepreneur filling that need. And the two of them connecting and closing that deal quickly and efficient. And to us, there's a map that actually does lead to that for almost every need that exists within schools. My co-founder and I, Hisham Anwar, actually sat down and developed two things before we started BrightBytes. One was a sales channel approach, and one was a sales cycle approach. And when I say before we started BrightBytes, I actually mean before we invented the product. So before we actually decided on what our product would be, we sat down and said, how do we break the sales cycle and sales channel challenges in schools? On the sales channel side, we developed something that's called, this is internally at BrightBytes, so we call it the pyramid of value, or the value proposition pyramid. And that's our response to this, this monolithic phrase that gets bandied about, how do you sell into schools? You know, we started with this at BrightBytes. We said, you know, everyone says, how do you sell into schools? And what we began to unpack and realize is you don't sell into schools. There's actually a 7-level pyramid of people who are in the education cycle. And they start at the very bottom with students, and then they move to teachers. And then you have individual schools, and then you have districts, and then you have regions, and then you have states, and then you have countries. And those 7 people within that pyramid have very different needs within the educational system and very different value propositions. And we think the most important thing you could do as a company before you even start to put your product, before you write one line of code, is to decide who am I speaking to within those 7? Whose need am I satisfying? But then also, who's writing the check? Because the value proposition for the person writing the check can actually be vastly different than the value proposition from the person consuming the actual product. And I see a lot of nodding of heads, and you've kind of figured this out too. So for us, our unique value proposition was around appeal. We're a data analytics company, so we're Google Analytics for learning. We take and identify gaps in the spending around technology. Schools are spending globally $150 billion a year on educational technology. And it's very difficult to know what the learning outcomes are, the ROI, in terms of learning of that spending. And that's really what BrightBytes does. It helps schools figure out what the impact was of the money that was spent and to target future spending so that it's much more effective and actually produces learning outcomes that people are really satisfied with. And we targeted districts and regions and states as our 3 primary go-to-market strategy. And because of that, we wrote all of our value propositions around our software in the eyes of those consumers, particularly the ones that were going to be thinking about paying the check on this. And we were able to distribute, we just launched the product in April and May. And we just started selling into schools in July and August. And we've actually sold into 1,000 schools since August. And we've done that because we've really thought about how to scale the channel quickly. Our sales cycle right now is running about 6 to 8 weeks instead of months or a year or longer. And on the sales cycle side, a lot of what we thought about was what we call the 3 Bs, you know, bureaucracy, you know, budget, and bandwidth. So if you're going to break through the sales cycle challenges in schools, you better know how to get through these 3 things. You know, the bureaucracy that's going to keep you from, you know, the minute that someone says, we should get a committee together to decide if we should buy your product, you are doomed. You know, like that's just like the kiss of death, right? Am I right here? Yeah. So that's the bureaucracy. So the second one, the budget. You know, who actually is motivated enough to write a check? Not who will think this is a good product and actually, you know, you could have every teacher in the school think this is the greatest product in the world, and if the technology director doesn't really think much of it, you'll probably never see a check written from that school. And the last part is bandwidth. That's how do you get their attention? You know, how do you break through the 30 to 50 vendors that are pounding on the door every single day? And how do you actually take an approach? We've taken we've had a little bit of a competitive advantage in that area, in the sense that because I've been a thought leader in this space, I can use thought leadership as a way to break through the bandwidth and to get some people's attention. I'll keynote speak at conferences and things like that. But we actually think there's a lot of schools out there that could use an approach that's much more centered around being an advocate of technology and learning in schools in a more general sense than just what their product is. And that can open up actually a lot of conversations and a lot of doors to what your product does. And there's a lot of different ways to provide that value to a school outside of what your product is actually doing. So I'm going to stop there. It's a little bit on me and what I'm doing, and I'll turn it over to John.
Hi, so again, my name is Jan Zawadzki. I'm the CEO of Hapara. Probably unlike everybody else on the panel, my background is actually tech. I used to be a certified OSD kernel engineer, if that means anything to you, the hard end of tech. As a company, we actually started life in New Zealand. So I've heard all the sheep jokes. The problem we solve has to do with schools adopting horizontal platforms like Google Apps. Just very quickly, how many of you use Google Apps? All right, excellent. We'd love to talk to you. So just to explain to you what we do, imagine you're a teacher and you've got 30, and if you're an elementary school teacher, 200 students sharing everything they write with you. Now imagine what your Google Docs would look like. That's the problem we fixed. Many, many more layers to it, but in brief. I alluded earlier to the opportunity globally. In 100 countries putting broadband to every school. It's an enormous curve. And the trick here, I guess, is figuring out how to hook onto the right drivers there. One of the questions we actually talked about a bit earlier with the other panelists here is how do you sell to schools and districts, and why do you charge? So we charged from day one. And to echo some of the comments earlier, right, the solution to the really simple one-step formula to selling in education is solve the problem. Really. And hence the comments about, if you haven't set foot in the classroom for any significant period of time in the last 5 years, make sure you're not solving yesterday's problem. Okay? That's a big thing. Right? So for us, the decision to charge came quite naturally, in a sense that, A, I like to pay my bills. I'm hung up on that whole thing. But secondly, in education, it's actually really easy to get teachers to say, hey, that's such a cool thing. Wow. Hey, thanks. That's wonderful. Right? I'm going to tell all my friends about it. And getting them to actually go to the principal and say, hey, I need you to write a check. And that's one very easy way to focus your business. Right? If you can get the teachers to go to the principal and get the principal to write you a check, you're doing something right. It will focus what you do, how you do it, it'll focus the priorities, it'll focus you on the problems you're solving. Right? So sort of our sort of key learning here is figuring out what the problem is and making sure you address that problem. The other point here I suppose I wanted to make is that we came into the US already having customers in half a dozen countries. Don't lose track of the fact that the US K-12 population is 4% of the global K-12. It's a big world. It's a big world with a lot of money. Right? If you look at the populations again, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand together are twice the size of the US population-wise. If you look at Asia, there's a huge amount of funding going into education. So again, look at the problems you're solving and think about how these problems manifest themselves elsewhere. Because again, it's a huge market with a lot of money, with a lot of students, and oftentimes with a decision process that's much, much simpler than it is in the US.
Great. So before I turn to your further comments and conversation, I'd just like us to get a little more specific around the question of learning outcomes. Which apps seem to be making a difference? How do you connect up investment in technology with learning outcomes? Just tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing that could actually affect the learning of students.
So outcomes mean many different things. They mean engagement, they mean standardized scores, and in fact that's kind of important to know the people you're dealing with, the problem you're solving. Right? So if you look at the ecosystem that exists in your particular solution set, what do they mean by outcomes? Right? Is it engaging parents? Is it making sure the students are engaged? What does that mean? Or is it just scores in the last standardized assessment? One of the benefits, I guess, we have is that we're able to provide answers in ways that are difficult for schools to get otherwise. And we're able to show the outcomes. One of our earlier customers was a school in New Zealand, actually a cluster of schools, and we managed to get our Ministry of Education to come in with a few PhDs to work and do an independent study of student outcomes and literacy, which showed a 9-fold improvement for students, and that improvement was actually higher for students who are traditionally long tail. So if you're able to do that, obviously that simplifies a lot of discussions going forward. So I think outcomes are a good thing. Make sure you understand what they are and what's important to the people you're talking to.
And just specifically, what kinds of literacy apps were they using? What seemed to make a difference for them?
Right, so literacy is a many-headed beast. The things we look at, again, because this was a government-funded study, is outcomes in terms of standardized assessment that's deployed countrywide. If you can, that's really where the rubber hits the road for a lot of education systems. Right? That's what they're measured on. That's tied to their funding, et cetera. If you have to resort to more creative metrics, or metrics that don't exist around engagement, et cetera, by all means do, but having something that's tied to standardized assessment, that's black and white, and that can show those numbers going up, that's really what you want to have.
Rob, did you want to say more about linking investments to outcomes, the work that you're doing? What seems to make a difference?
You know, one of the things I would say is that schools and districts will often know what their ultimate outcome is that they want to achieve. But that very, very often there are intermediate outcomes between the use of the technology and the ultimate outcome. And that many times those are very blurry in the minds of the school community, and they may not even have thought through the whole process. You know, we've seen schools dumping millions and millions of dollars into access. And when we use our platform to evaluate, these are schools that are already one-to-one schools. They've been one-to-one, student one-to-one and teacher one-to-one for multiple years. And when we look at their scores in the classroom around what they're using the technology for, they're using the technology for PowerPoint presentations, typing up papers, and doing Google searches, which is pretty much one of just the lowest entry-level things that we could be doing. And so when we query the schools as to, you know, when you put the technology in, you know, what was the path that you thought? What are all the checkboxes that you need to do along the way? There's a lot of, you know, that's a lot of work to try to figure out all of those different moving parts. And I would just say not only with any product that's going into schools, to be able to present that value proposition, where do you sit with, it doesn't have to be, I have an app and test scores go up. You know, if you can present the value proposition as I do this, and this is how that works within the ecosystem of the school to produce the final outcome, I actually find educators really get that, and that they're willing to spend money on it.
Great, so invite your further comments and questions for the panelists. Invite the panelists to query each other or comment on other points you've made as well. Yes, in the back.
I'll ask a question, I can't help it. One of the big concerns, of course, that every school has when it deals with entrepreneurs is what happens, you know, entrepreneurs are kind of an experiment, right? We're trying something new, we're trying to build something. And as many teachers have pointed out, the students are going to be there every single day, whether or not the entrepreneur shows up again. So I'd love to ask you a question in almost like a flash round kind of way, and Milton, I'd love to have your answer too, which is, how do you feel about the word experiment in education? How do you feel about the idea that some of this technology is experimental? And are we experimenting, in our schools? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Start the flash round.
Sure. I mean, morally, I have a problem with experiments that run the risk of failure. Obviously, these are kids' lives. You're impacting them forever in many cases. Sort of related to the topic is the notion of failure and what happens when EdTech companies go away. And so something to think about yourself is one thing that's going through the mind of every teacher you're dealing with is, I'm going to spend untold amount of hours putting content, getting my kids up to speed on your tools. How do I know you're not going away next January? So different facets of experimentation. And incidentally, the answer to that second question is charge. Right? Charge money, because that's one way to tell teachers saying, hey, we're going to be around next January because we're getting paid.
Yeah, the word that came up in my mind when you said experimental is essential. I have shared the same moral quandary as you do, but I've seen the Trojan horse that exists where people hide behind this idea that there's no possible way we can differentiate what one class is experiencing compared to another class, and that paralyzes any implementation to be all or nothing, which pretty much paralyzes innovation. You know, there's no way you're going to implement something across 75,000 students or 250,000 students simultaneously on one day. And so if you have people who are forward thinking in the district and see the usefulness of experiments and do them in a way that's well designed and very careful, I think that you can really have an opportunity to make real breakthroughs in learning outcomes. So I think they're absolutely needed, and I agree with you completely. And one of the things we had to decide was, do we go with a freemium model or a free model, or do we go, where do we put the slider on cash versus free? And what we went 50-50. We charge a price for our product that's a reasonable price. We probably could be in about 10 times the number of schools right now if our product was free. But we want to be in business next year. We want them to know that we're going to be in business next year. We want them to feel like they're getting value from what we're doing. So we've gone the same way.
I have a little bit of a hard time talking about experimenting kind of in stark moral terms, because it's not like you all are evil scientists, tinkering with children's brains as EdTech entrepreneurs. And the reality is that teachers every day are trying out new things in their classrooms. It's not, experimenting or trying new things educationally is not the exclusive domain of education technology. So I think, we kind of need to get over the idea that experimenting is, evil, right? Because we're going to need to try new things in order to get better and get better outcomes.
Yeah, to echo that, experimenting is necessary, and what goes along with experimenting is actually failure. And it's really tough. It's really tough what we're doing in our schools. It's really big challenges, and you're going to make mistakes. And the sooner we get comfortable that mistakes are going to be made, then you can actually face up to them and then make changes and address them. Too often, I think, in the education community, we're afraid that someone made a mistake and therefore just kind of let it go and don't challenge the status quo and won't shake things up. So I think as a society and as entrepreneurs, that you're going to make mistakes all the time. And that's going to lead you to better outcomes. And there's issues with doing it with the students in the classroom, and you want them to have everything perfect at that time. But without pushing ourselves, without thinking that failure is an option, what happens is we're just moving along with the status quo, which is just not acceptable right now.
I'm not too sure I have too much to add to that, but just the thought that came across in my mind, our superintendent says we have to break the elasticity of the status quo. How in the world can we possibly not break the elasticity of status quo without experimentation? And it's absolutely true. Teachers experiment every single day. Administrators experiment every single day. I think the bigger questions are, number one is how do we fail quickly? And how do we learn from that? And how do we adjust to that? And yeah, it's not gonna have my child. The reality is it is happening to every single one of your children, it doesn't matter where you are. You know, we have teachers in a variety of different levels of mastery. So teachers that are first starting out, they're quite frankly experimenting and learning. Yes, they have an academic background, but it's very different when you step in the classroom. I think we've all experienced that. The other thing, I'd like to comment on the charge concept, that if you want to try to convince teachers that yes, they'll stay in business by continuing to charge, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're staying in business that will continue to use the product. That's one of the challenges a lot of our teachers face. You know, it's just that in continuing budget declines, you know, we don't necessarily have the money next year. So just because you're charging doesn't necessarily mean that that really is going to make the teacher feel comfortable. And actually, I think in most cases, teachers are saying, how do I know the funding is available for next year?
Just quickly, that I actually think more parents and teachers would like to do more new kinds of things, I'll put it that way. Maybe experimentation is not the right word for this. But I like some of the proposals that the problem is that teachers don't get a chance to do this enough with the testing regime, with the policies that are in place. Some people have been advocating, Daniel Pink among one of them, that we adopt the Google 10% rule for teachers. Give them 10% of their time, if their kids are using technology during part of the class, to work with other teachers and come up with projects that they want to do, that they think would have some impact on their kids. Maybe you could develop an app for that. Track these projects, track progress. The key to it is that if you come up with something, you have to make a presentation to the entire school community about what it is that you've come up with. So I like to somehow foster more innovation. I think the time is ripe for that, but yet the policies we have in place don't encourage teachers to do that. Let's turn to Terry Bergeson, and a number of you have other comments.
I'm very interested in the advent of the Common Core academic standards. I was a state superintendent of public instruction in Washington State for 12 years, and we built standards from the ground up, but every state did their own thing. So you had 50 markets on top of the markets within the markets. Now we have 48 states that have adopted the literacy standards and the mathematics, and the next generation science is coming. And I would have given my right arm to have been able to implement for 12 years, figuring out how to do the kind of learning that is implicit and explicit in those standards, thinking and engagement and habits of mind. So I'd love to have your thoughts about having the possibility of this marketplace, and there's very little action happening at the national level to support the kind of development that needs to happen. But we need to do that because it is our opportunity in the United States to take part in the world in a way that we should. So I'm curious to see what you think about how to do that, because that's the kind of power that's in this room, educators and not
What's that? Gloria's got it.
So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm sure that, I hope that the entrepreneurs in the room recognize that that the advent of the Common Core actually fundamentally changes the marketplace for all of you, and actually makes it much more possible and viable for all of you to get to scale more quickly. So I think it's really exciting. And I would also say that it also suggests this goes back to Jan's point about needing to think about the new kinds of education that's necessary rather than the old kind. The Common Core, if you haven't read them, you actually should. Because and compare them to your state standards. Because the shifts that it entails in terms of what teachers need to do and what kids are going to need to do are really significant. And they're good. What it means is that kids are going to be asked to not just regurgitate facts or do the procedural part of the math, but actually deeply understand the concept, think critically, be able to synthesize and analyze, and all the other stuff that we believe is really good. And so the kinds of tools that you need in order to be able to measure outcomes on Common Core are much more sophisticated than what we see out there right now, which is a lot of like, oh, do this multiple choice thing. And so it is a huge groundbreaking shift, and I really hope that some of you out there are looking at ways to seize this opportunity. I know that some of us are, right? Jan?
If I could just add, if you don't understand the Common Core, don't bother going overseas, because US is somewhere between 10 to 20 years behind the rest of the world. The rest of the world has had Common Core. So these concepts aren't new. They're well versed. If you don't understand it at a conceptual level, again, you'll have a hard time elsewhere.
My name is Kareem Ani. I'm the founder of a company called Mathelicious, and we're rewriting middle and high school math around higher order critical thinking skills. I was a former classroom teacher and a math coach, and actually I'm happy to follow along your question because we're doing a pilot now with a large school district in Virginia around project-based learning. And the project that they're piloting explores whether Usain Bolt has an unfair height advantage and what would happen if the Olympics were organized proportionally. And what we're finding is that it's an incredibly big challenge because it involves supporting teachers in content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge and transitioning from small group instruction to large group instruction. Basically the things that anybody in this room has been a classroom teacher is familiar with. But those are also the things, supporting teachers in that are also the things that don't scale very well. And you're probably never going to be able to write a computer program that can really evaluate a student's thinking until we get to how. And so, one of the questions I do have, and I think the meta question that I've had over the past couple of years in reading about EdTech, and John, this gets back to your question, is, when you look at Finland and when you look at Japan and the countries that continue to just spank us, they don't have a lot of technology, but they have invested in teacher support and teacher training and professional development and ongoing professional development and really good curriculum. And so you had mentioned, one of the things you said, John, was we have to identify the problem and solve the problem. But in the same way that the Atkins diet or the Nike Fuel Band isn't a solution for obesity, I wonder whether all of this talk about EdTech is correctly identifying the problem, or are these just high-tech solutions to what is fundamentally a low-tech problem?
Well, I'm going to give that one to you.
I'll just say briefly and turn it to the panel that there are ways, we're seeing it in curriculum, in which technology, web-based, app-based content can redefine the learning experience for kids in ways that you cannot do with low-tech. One of my favorite apps, video conferencing. The chance to take kids to places they will never have a chance to visit, to show them. I'm an advocate of getting the national parks into the education game, to take them to the Grand Canyon, to take them to the Civil War battlefields, and support that with the kind of content and interpretation that is there. This cannot be done without technology.
Yeah, you asked the question, is it this or is it that? And I'd like to say yes. To me, when I look at a 21st century learning environment, it is so fundamentally different in what is capable and possible within that environment compared to 1995. The sum of all human knowledge has been placed online, along with 2 billion people who can teach you in real time what it means. And in schools, we still largely have a model that places one teacher and 35 students in a room. We hand them a textbook, we call that knowledge. This is biology. And we pretend that there aren't 2 quintillion pieces of information on the web that are available about biology, along with thousands and thousands of people who could asynchronously and synchronously teach that biology much better than the teacher, and individualize that instruction for all of the students in that room in a way that they would never understand it coming out of the mouth of a single person, regardless of the most talented teacher on the face of the earth. And so when I think about your problem, it's, you're right. I mean, one is, how do we get our schools to really realize that, the format in which we teach right now, which is sort of this, I'm the knower of knowledge, and I'm going to, fill the empty vessel in front of me, get you to be more intelligent. How do we break that cycle and actually realize there's a whole new possibility for learning in real ways? But to me, it's impossible to do that without the technology being involved. I mean, it's okay with me if the technology is transparent. If you hear someone under the age of 21 talk about looking something up online, they say, I'm going to look that up. If you hear somebody over the age of 50 say it, they go, I'm going to look that up on the internet. Because to them, the internet is something that was invented during their lifetime, and it's a mode and it's a mechanism. It's not like just breathing air. And I think we do need to get to the point where the technology in our schools is a lot like just breathing air. We don't see the technology in our schools. But I think right now we're going to have to go through a decade where we see it every single day because the schools were there 100 and 200 years prior to the technology being there. And so I find it impossible to separate out the two parts of the question. I think you're absolutely right. We're going to have to change both.
So I guess I want to say something a little risky to that, but you know, the populations of some of the countries you commented, Finland, Sweden, other countries, they largely have homogeneous populations. In our country, we have a heterogeneous population. We have a highly diverse population with people with many different cultural backgrounds, many different learning styles, many different impacts on how they do that. That's a good thing. That is fantastic. So how do we do that without technology? I mean, how do you really personalize? And I think today I heard a lot about adaptive learning. How do you really adapt the learning to unique learning style and deal with the cultural issues and the home issues and societal issues that a lot of these children are facing that aren't really, you know, achieving as high as some of the other students. So how do we do that? You know, it was kind of made earlier that, you know, some of the high achieving students are going to have parents who make sure they have everything they need. I happen to be one of those parents. It's part of the reason why, you know, I'm a technologist. I actually like being in education, and one of the ways I recruit technologists into education, I was saying, there's nothing more important than your kid. And if you come to education, you're going to learn how they learn. And that's something that is actually, I can often steal a couple of people out of technology, out of the private sector world and bring them in at much lower pay, horrible work conditions. But I can do that successfully because that is important to them, and it does matter. So the technology, I think, is important in doing that and making that happen. But the answer is, like I said, yes to both. We cannot leave out professional development. We cannot leave out the teacher supports. The teacher is still a critical piece. Technology does not replace the teacher. Does the teacher do something differently? Yes, but it cannot replace the teacher.
Yeah.
One more thing. So yeah. We're here in many ways in the heart of Silicon Valley, right? There's a thing you just need to be a bit careful with. How many of you here think of yourselves as techies? I mean, compare yourself to like your parents, right? They're not techies. Like, are you a techie in the eyes of your sort of civilian friends? Yeah, most of you. Great. I wager most people in this room. There was a mentality in the tech world that anything that's 18 months or older is old, right? We sort of naturally gravitate to being shiny. The reality in education is that we've studied how people learn for thousands of years. The chances that you've come up with this great new technology that's going to change how people learn, that's never been thought of before, is fairly low, really. So I guess keep in mind that technology augments how we learn. Sometimes better ways, sometimes in worse ways. But I think there's a real risk, and there's an attitude that I've seen here in the Valley, actually elsewhere in the tech space, that the ultimate goal here is to figure out what video do we need to queue up for this kid, right? And if we just watch their keystrokes well enough and put enough CPU power behind it, we'll arrive at this optimal learning path, which will involve just queuing up the next video. I think we're all in violent agreement.
We're coming up on 7 o'clock, but I do want to make sure those of you who have been waiting get a chance to ask your questions. Maybe 3 or 4 more questions, some quick questions and comments from our panel.
Bill Jackson, the CEO of Great Schools. So last week I saw David Coleman speak, and he said something very interesting that I want to ask you, anybody on the panel, to react to. He said, and I loosely quote, he's the new president of the College Board, for those of you who don't know who he is, and an author of the Common Core Standards. He said, technology that aids and abets distraction is outpacing technology that cultivates student capacity for concentration.
I think one of the complex things about that is defining what concentration and distraction look like in the internet age. So if I'm reading a book now and I read it from page 1 to page 280 and I don't put it down and look at anything else, did I just concentrate, or did I just perform actually an act of distraction? And the reason I ask that is, if my friend is reading a hypertext version of the same Shakespeare book, and he's linked into the blogs and the critical literature and what his friends are saying at the same time, And they're actually able to do that and in real time adapt to what they're reading. What's the balance between those two worlds? And this isn't binary, and I think we could probably give examples of both sides of that, where if you're not immersed enough, or if you're immersed too much, you end up being either distracted or removed from the situation. But I think that that's actually one of the things that's making learning so interesting right now, is that I think the very definition of what it means to be knowledgeable is changing. We have what does it mean when you can look up any answer on your phone within seconds, and you couldn't do that 15 years ago? Does that mean that because you didn't memorize your phone numbers and they all sit in your phone, that you're now stupid? Probably not. So if you're not memorizing the periodic table either, but you actually know how the elements interact with one another, are you stupid? Just because you can look up calcium instead of memorizing it? So I think it's a really interesting question, actually, and I think that question between concentration and distraction is going to be a lot of what we talk about for the next 5 to 10 years.
I also think that point is an example and highlights, I think, that this is not, like EdTech is not an all good thing, right? That there are unintended consequences. And in addition to this question about concentration and distraction, which is obviously not as simple as it seems on the surface, I think there's also a real question about the motivation techniques that are used in a lot of the EdTech games and apps, right? Which is all very like, you get a badge, you get a gold coin, you get which is all very extrinsic motivation. And so, do we end up creating, a population of students who really don't want to do anything unless they're going to get a little shiny badge online? Right? So, just as another example. But so I think it's incumbent upon all of us, especially those of us who are investing and those of us who are creating some of this stuff, to really be thoughtful about the unintended consequences of what we're creating.
Let's take 2 more questions. Yes.
Hi. Thanks. My name is Victor. I'm co-founder and CEO of Scribble, which is helping to change the way people do reading research on the web. So I've got a question that kind of goes back to something that Gloria was talking about earlier with regards to direct consumer versus working with institutions. There's obviously this sort of 2 trends, or probably related trends, related to direct to consumer and sort of consumerization of learning. So you see startups like Skillshare and Udemy and organizations like Khan Academy that essentially at some level sort of disintermediate the traditional institutions that largely you all represent at some level, or some of you. And it seems to me that there's also, in sort of sync with that, there's a lot of hype around investing in this space. And so a lot of traditional consumer internet investors are getting interested because they sort of see growth there. I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts about whether or not that's rewarding the wrong thing, and where you're actually rewarding growth from the investor standpoint rather than learning outcomes, and how that might be muddying the waters, and also how it might actually be getting some of us in this room excited, but then getting ready for a letdown, because it's not really about kind of what you're doing in the classroom or helping teachers or whatnot. It's really about whether or not you can get a lot of user numbers up for your direct-to-consumer or consumerization of learning type of a venture.
So I think it's a really good point. I like to think that, I talked a little bit before about how NewSchools is a mission-oriented investor, and so we are very focused on tools that actually solve real problems for students and teachers, and that actually do improve with learning outcomes, but definitely there's a real pressure, real financial pressure on a lot of the EdTech companies that we work with and see to scale up fast, even if that means making their product more attractive on the surface, but actually less educationally valuable, or whatever. So I do think that there's a real tension. I'm hoping it's going to kind of work itself out, and I think we are excited to see and really identify the entrepreneurs that are kind of in that sweet spot, that are both scalable and provide real educational value. But I don't think there's a simple answer to it, unfortunately.
And let's see. I'm sorry we don't have time for everyone's questions, but maybe if someone hasn't had a chance.
This gentleman. I'm sure the panelists will be willing to stay on and have some more conversation.
Hi, my name is Izu Akamir. I'm with Goldman Sachs. And I find it interesting when you look at just San Francisco as the city itself. There's about 1.3 million people who live below what we call the self-sustainability level. That's meaning, you know, every day a breadwinner has to make the decision whether to put food on a plate, a lot of times it's a child's plate, or whether to pay their rent. And we know that education is the surest way out of poverty, so it's great to see so much innovation happening in the education space. But we've had a lot of commentary on how hard it is to break into a school district or break into a charter school with a new innovation, a new product. And so as an entrepreneur, we have to focus marketing and sales efforts in a very concentrated way. A lot of times, maybe that's in a richer school district or it's in a richer charter school. My question is that a kind of unintended consequence? Is that a kind of an unintended consequence of capitalism, where you have to go to the richer areas and hope the technology trickles down? Or are there opportunities for entrepreneurs to take their innovations and still be successful, be able to pay their bills, but also take the technology to an area where it might have greater impact sooner?
Are you sure you're with Goldman Sachs? So the interesting thing is actually, those of you who have been selling into schools probably know this, but schools that are serving high percentages of low-income students or students that have English as a second language actually get extra chunks of money. So it's not as if there's not an opportunity to also pay your bills by selling into schools that are serving kids who need it most.
Yeah, I mean, I want to build on that comment, because actually the government assistance goes to schools that aren't in the wealthy neighborhood. And you may actually have a more challenge trying to sell to a wealthy neighborhood than the neighborhood where there's a higher poverty rate. Because one of the things we are somewhat disappointed and fortunate in San Francisco is that we do have a fair amount of poverty in the city, and we can use that to get a lot of government funds that other school districts may not be able to. And some that has a very technology in those grants, they actually want to see that you have technology being used. So I wouldn't necessarily say no, go out to the wealthy school districts.
Great. Let's see. I think we'll end the session here, and I'm sure the panelists will be glad to stay on and answer other questions. I know there are a few others who want to ask. But let's join me in thanking our panelists. Jan, and let's also thank our organizers and hosts, Larry Kane from ORIC and Betsy Corcoran from EdSurge, San Francisco School Alliance, Terry Ferguson. The title of this panel was us being at a crossroads, and I certainly hope that, even though we didn't answer questions tonight, we did, I think, make a commitment that San Francisco and the Bay Area should be a hub of this kind of innovation. You all represent it, and I hope we can work together more to make this a reality in our schools. So thank you.